Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Everyday Driven by DJ. Today we are going to talk about purchasing or leasing, let's say acquiring, an electric vehicle. I'd like to go through and discuss my experiences with doing both straight purchases and leasing of EVs. There's some significant difference, a lot of cost benefit that really swings towards one more than the other. But ultimately it comes down to your own personal preferences. Speaking for myself, I can say that I typically don't like to keep a vehicle more than 18 to 24 months. I find that I usually get bored with whatever it is that I'm driving around that time, and I'd like to spice things up and get something different. What I found with EVs in particular is that the best bang for your buck comes out of leasing. The first EV that I had was the OG Audi e-tron SUV. That was a purchase. It was a great vehicle, but depreciation on EVs is just killer and really makes the straight out purchase or finance of an EV not the best financial decision to make. And I say that it's not a good financial decision when you look at the long-term costs of ownership. And I'm talking, what's the sum of your payments over the course of 2 or 3 years, along with the amount of electricity that you're going to be using, your standard maintenance that you still should be performing on your EVs, your tire rotations, buying new tires, because that will be something you have to do over the course of your ownership. And really comparing that against the financing option, when you look at the end of a lease, you don't have a value that you're necessarily caring about for the vehicle unless your intent is to buy it out because you just absolutely fell in love with it. My experience has been, you purchase an EV and the value of it is pretty much in a nosedive, and that's really a product of these being such a new item on the market per se, even though Tesla has had theirs on the market for at least a decade at this point, right? But to most auto manufacturers, they are still new. The prices are inflated, and the true value is really seen in the second or third year of the vehicle's existence. And that creates a lot of issue for me with financing or the outright purchase of a vehicle. For me, I'm looking at, what is this vehicle going to be worth down the road? How much money am I losing in the value of the vehicle? Because if something happens and I decide I need to get out of it, or there's something new and shiny on the market that I want to get into, am I really taking a huge loss for that? And I don't think a lot of people are looking at that when they're purchasing an EV, because that's not how ICE vehicles, and I probably shouldn't use ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles have depreciated over the years. They don't nosedive the same way that EVs do. So when you're shopping around, you should really consider, what is the value of the vehicle going to be in 2 to 3 years? And am I going to care about having that value available in 2 to 3 years? That's why I've decided to go the route of leasing. When I put all the numbers together, and I'm neurotic, I put together spreadsheets for everything, looking at the 2-year cost of financing on one hand, with a substantially lower value at the end of that time period against the cost to lease the vehicle and then just turn it in when you're done. I found that leasing is the much better route to go down. In general terms, leasing is cheaper too. Granted, you are paying for the rental of the vehicle. You don't truly own the vehicle. You're responsible for any damages at the end when you turn it in. But most automakers, when you go through the leasing process, will offer up a damage protection package. Both the Blazer EV and the Jeep Wagoneer S that I currently own, both vehicles, when I went through the leasing process, were offered to me with a damage protection. It added cost to my monthly lease payment, sure, but it was minimal. And looking at that at the end of the lease is valuable. The other thing that you have to consider is, what are you locked into mileage-wise? And are you going to be able to work around that? I can't. I leased for 15,000 miles a year. I know going into that I'm not going to stay within those 15,000 miles a year. But that's okay. I know what I'm getting into because I know what the overage is going to be ahead of time. And that's usually something that dealers and automakers are upfront about. It's something you can easily find by doing a Google search. And so as you're running your analysis for what your all-in 2-year, 3-year, whatever the leasing period is, value is for your cost comparison, you can add in that overage. And that's what I've had to do, and for me, leasing is still cheaper because the leasing rates at the time were so much less than the finance rates. The money factor applied to the lease was significantly less than the APR percentage on a loan. Another thing you've got to do when you're leasing, and this seems like a no-brainer, right, is that you've got to shop around. The same way that you're going to shop around for, a great deal on any vehicle, you want to shop around for leases too. I found that vehicles in Central Florida aren't generally discounted that much. I did probably make a mistake when I initially leased the Blazer EV, by not shopping around as much as I should have. I didn't get as great of a lease deal as I could have on that one. And I'll admit that kind of contributed to me wanting to get out of that vehicle as much as I did. When I went to look for the Wagoneer S, I shopped around on that one. I looked all over the state of Florida, and I ended up getting this vehicle in South Florida because there was a dealer that had the color that I wanted and the trim that I wanted significantly discounted. I was able to get into this one. It was a $71,000 MSRP vehicle, but I was able to get into it for $51,000 and lease it at that price. So you've got to shop around. I know it's frustrating, but you can't just settle for what's near you. And after going through what I've been through in all the vehicles that I've been in, whether I've purchased them or whether I've leased them, you have to be willing to look around and you have to be willing to drive a little bit. Of the vehicles that I've purchased, half of them have come from one specific dealer because I like dealing with the people who work there and they've always treated me well. And that's made me a repeat customer. And depreciation on EVs is killer right now because of the way that the technology is constantly evolving. Look at the way that computers, rose in popularity in the mid to late 90s, and how things were just constantly changing, processors, memory, everything was improving year after year. and things were constantly becoming obsolete. The same exists for EVs right now. And I believe there will be a period when, we've kind of reached the pinnacle or the max of what EV technology can be, and things will level out, and it'll, the marketplace will become a lot more stable. But right now, there's so much innovation happening, whether it's, changing and using different battery chemistries, going from lithium to solid state batteries that we're going to see introduced here in the next couple of years, or, the improvements and evolution of what electric vehicle motors can be. Looking at the evolution that Rivian has made, going from their Enduro engine to the Maximus engine that's going to be introduced with the R2, and simplifying what is necessary in that electric engine, removing a significant amount of welds, and just making the engine itself much more efficient from a construction standpoint, is going to be huge. And that we're going to continue seeing evolution like that for the next couple of years. And that's going to mean that, EVs that are introduced right now are going to continue to have the monstrous amount of depreciation that we've been seeing for the last couple of years. And that's okay, though, because this line of vehicles and this part of the auto industry needs to evolve. It needs to have that innovation to get it to its most efficient, its maximum point. All in, my conclusion, right now, the way that the EV market is, the way that the technology is continuously evolving and improving, I think unless you're somebody who can, force yourself to keep a vehicle for 10 years or so, leasing an EV is the way to go. If you run the numbers and you think logically through this, I think you'll find a conclusion very similar to the one that I reached. The best bang for your buck, lease for a couple of years. Even if you go over on miles, you can still pay the difference and come out looking like a winner. Please remember to like and subscribe, and as always, I'll catch you next time.